Melissa couldn't believe her eyes as Marine One landed behind her home. The presidential helicopter's arrival was shocking enough, but even more unbelievable was why it was here. Just 3 weeks earlier, she'd given up her first-class seat to a badly burned stranger on a flight. What happened next would change her life forever. Melissa Collins had been a travel agent at Sunshine Travel for nearly 6 years. Day after day, she helped clients plan luxury vacations to destinations she could only dream of visiting herself. Would you prefer the presidential suite at the Ritz or the overwater bungalow in the Maldives? She'd ask her wealthy clients, all while knowing her own vacation would be a weekend at her mom's timeshare if she was lucky. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Melissa could perfectly describe the feel of Egyptian cotton sheets in Singapore's finest hotels and the taste of champagne on private yacht tours in Monaco. Yet she'd experienced neither. Her boss once called her the architect of dreams she'd never lived. Her desk told the story, covered with postcards from grateful clients enjoying sunsets she'd researched, infinity pools she'd booked, and first-class lounges she'd only seen in brochures. But despite everything, she didn't resent a single moment. That's who Melissa was, always living vicariously through her clients' experiences, genuinely thrilled when she could make someone else's dreams come true. Her boss, Mr. Hendricks, had noticed this quality in her from day one. Every month, Mr. Hendricks would post the agency's booking totals on the breakroom wall. For 5 years straight, Melissa's name had topped the list. Not because she was pushy or sales-driven, but because clients trusted her completely. "I don't understand how you do it," Lindsay said one day over their sad desk lunches of microwaved leftovers. "You've never even been to half these places." Melissa smiled. "I research everything like I'm planning my own dream trip. I read every review, watch every video, join every travel forum. I probably know more about the presidential suite at the Burj Al Arab than people who've actually stayed there." Still, Lindsay persisted. "Don't you ever get jealous booking all these amazing experiences for other people while you vacation at your mom's timeshare in Florida?" Melissa's smile faltered just slightly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but making other people's dreams come true, it's almost as good as living them yourself. Almost." So when Melissa's sister Emma announced she was getting married in Sydney, Australia, Melissa knew she had to be there, even if it meant depleting her modest savings. What Melissa didn't expect was her co-workers secretly pooling their airline miles and employee discounts to upgrade her economy ticket to first class. "We know how much you love your sister," Lindsay explained as they presented her with the new ticket, "and nobody deserves this experience more than you." For weeks afterward, Melissa could hardly contain her excitement. She'd pored over online reviews of the airline's first-class service, studied the menu, even practiced what she'd say to the flight attendants. Her sister teased her relentlessly. "I'm beginning to think you're more excited about the flight than my actual wedding," Emma joked during their last phone call before the trip. "Can you blame me?" Melissa laughed. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing for someone like me." On the morning of her flight, Melissa arrived at the airport 3 hours early, too excited to wait at home any longer. She'd splurged on a new outfit for the occasion. Nothing flashy, but nice enough that she wouldn't feel out of place among the business executives and wealthy travelers who typically occupied first class. The first hint that this day Emma might not go as planned came as she waited at the gate. From the corner of her eye, she noticed other passengers giving a wide berth to a man sitting alone by the window. When he turned, Melissa saw W. The right side of his face bore the unmistakable marks of severe burns, the scarred skin pulling his features into a permanent grimace. His hands, resting on his carry-on, showed similar damage, the fingers stiff and gnarled. She watched as a mother quietly moved her children to seats farther away. A businessman who nearly sat in the empty chair beside him suddenly remembered he needed to make a call. The man noticed. Of course he noticed, but his expression never changed. He just kept staring out the window, his isolation complete even in the crowded terminal. Melissa recognized that look. It was the same expression her father had worn after his stroke left half his face paralyzed. That mixture of dignity and resignation, the practiced pretense of not noticing when people stared or avoided sitting next to him on the bus. Her dad had called it his invisible man look. Melissa couldn't help watching as a flight attendant approached the burned man to check his boarding pass. The attendant was professional but kept a noticeable distance, pointing toward the gate rather than leaning in, as she had with other passengers. The man nodded politely, his scarred hands clutching his ticket like it might disintegrate in his damaged fingers. As a travel agent, Melissa had arranged countless special accommodations for clients with mobility issues, dietary restrictions, or medical needs. She'd always assumed airlines treated everyone with basic dignity, yet here was evidence to the contrary, unfolding right in front of her. Flight 722 to Sydney, now boarding first class and priority passengers, the gate agent announced. Melissa gathered her things, heart racing with anticipation. As she walked toward the gate, she had to pass directly by the burned man, who was struggling to organize his carry-on items with his damaged hands. A small toiletry bag fell from his grip, spilling contents. Across the floor, people walked around the mess, eyes averted. Melissa stopped and knelt down, helping collect his scattered belongings. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice surprisingly gentle despite his appearance. "No problem," Melissa replied, noticing his boarding pass on the floor. She handed it back, glancing at the seat number out of professional habit, 38D, middle seat, coach, at the very back of the plane. The flight would be 14 hours long. Melissa thought about her sister waiting in Sydney, about the weeks of excitement leading up to this moment, about her co-workers who had given her this gift. Then she looked at the man who would spend those 14 hours cramped between two strangers, his burned skin constantly brushing against others in the confined space. Melissa thought about all the reasons not to offer her seat. Her co-workers had saved up for this gift. She'd planned this moment for weeks. She'd even bought a special outfit. She'd never get another chance at a first-class experience. And then she thought about her father, about the strangers who sometimes gave up their seats on the bus so he could sit when his balance was unsteady after the stroke. Small kindnesses that had made him feel human again. Before she could overthink it, Melissa heard herself say, "Excuse me, would you like to switch seats with me? I'm in 2A, first class." The man's scarred features couldn't fully express his surprise. "Why would you do that?" Melissa didn't have a rehearsed answer. "It looks like you could use the extra space and comfort more than I could today," she said simply. He seemed about to refuse, pride battling with physical discomfort. "I couldn't possibly." "Please," Melissa said, already handing him her boarding pass. "I insist." For just a moment, the wall of resignation in his eyes cracked, revealing a flash of emotion that made Melissa's chest tighten. Not gratitude exactly, but recognition, as if he'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a person, not a collection of scars. He started, his voice catching. "Thank you. This is more kindness than I've experienced in quite some time." Melissa felt a pang of sadness at the matter-of-fact way he said it. She'd give up 100 first-class seats if it meant not hearing that quiet resignation in someone's voice. The gate agent did a double-take when they approached together, Melissa explaining they wanted to switch seats. "Are you sure, ma'am?" she asked, clearly confused why anyone would give up such a premium seat. "I'm sure," Melissa said firmly. Walking through the first-class cabin toward the back of the plane, Melissa caught a glimpse of the burned man being welcomed by the flight attendant, offered a pre-departure champagne in a real glass. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and he gave her a nod of profound gratitude. For 14 hours, Melissa sat squeezed in a middle seat, her knees pressed against the seat in front of her. The elderly woman to her right fell asleep on her shoulder. The teenager to her left played games with the sound turned up too high. She ate the standard economy meal, a rubbery chicken dish with overcooked vegetables, while imagining the gourmet dinner being served at the front of the plane. At one point, she got up to use the restroom and passed through first class. The man was reclining comfortably, a real glass of wine on his tray table, an actual cloth napkin in his lap. When he saw her, he straightened slightly, a question in his eyes. Was she regretting her decision? Did she want her seat back? Melissa smiled and gave a small wave to show she was fine. The relief in his expression was worth every cramped minute of her coach seat. As she squeezed past the teenager to return to her seat, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the darkened window. She looked tired, her carefully chosen outfit now wrinkled. This wasn't how she'd planned to arrive in Sydney for her sister's wedding, not at all. But strangely, she felt no regret, just the quiet certainty that she'd done the right thing. Toward the end of the flight, a different flight attendant stopped by her row. "The gentleman in 2A asked me to give you this," she said, handing Melissa a folded napkin. Inside was a simple message written in careful, slightly shaky handwriting. "I won't forget your kindness. Thank you for seeing me." Melissa carefully tucked the napkin into her purse, suddenly feeling like she'd received something far more valuable than a first-class experience. When they landed in Sydney, Melissa quickly lost sight of the man in the crowd. She never even learned his name. Her week in Australia was wonderful, despite the rough start. Emma's wedding was beautiful, and the sisters made the most of their time together. Melissa never mentioned the first-class seat she had given away. Back home, life returned to normal. Melissa went back to booking dream vacations for others, the brief adventure becoming just another story she rarely told, until exactly 3 weeks after her return, when everything changed. The sound jolted Melissa awake at 5:47 a.m., a rhythmic thumping that rattled her windows and picture frames. At first, she thought it was an earthquake, but as the noise grew louder, she recognized the distinctive whomp 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 of helicopter rotors. Heart pounding, Melissa jumped out of bed and peered through her bedroom window. What she saw made her gasp. A massive helicopter was descending toward the empty field behind her small house. Not just any helicopter, this one was white with dark green N markings. Even from a distance she could make out the words United States of America on its side. It was Marine One, the presidential helicopter. "What on earth?" she whispered, her breath fogging the window glass. The helicopter's landing lights cut through the pre-dawn darkness, illuminating her modest backyard with an almost theatrical glow. The precision with which it hovered, slowly descending, spoke of elite military training. This wasn't some random helicopter. This was the aircraft that carried the President of the United States. Melissa rubbed her eyes, certain she must still be dreaming. But the noise was too real, the scene outside her window too detailed to be a dream. Men in dark suits and military uniforms had already secured the area. Some carried what looked like communication equipment. Others were clearly scanning the surroundings with practiced efficiency. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows were parked in her driveway. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered at the end of her street, kept back by what appeared to be local police. "This can't be happening," Melissa muttered, suddenly aware she was wearing her oldest pajamas, her hair a mess. Her house was probably a disaster. She hadn't done dishes last night. The sharp knock at her front door made her jump, 3 precise raps that somehow managed to sound official. Melissa looked around frantically, as if her modest living room might offer some explanation for why the presidential helicopter was landing behind her house. Instead, all she saw were travel magazines, her laptop with half-completed client itineraries, and yesterday's coffee mug. Still wearing her pajamas, Melissa answered the door with shaking hands. "Miss Collins?" the man asked, showing credentials that identified him as Secret Service. "We apologize for the early arrival. You have some visitors who would like to speak with you. Could you be ready in 15 minutes? "Visitors on Marine One?" Melissa stammered. The agent allowed a small smile. "If you could get dressed, ma'am, I'll explain everything." In a daze, Melissa threw on clothes and ran a brush through her hair. Through her kitchen window she could see the helicopter had landed, its rotors still slowly turning. A small group of people stood nearby, including several in military dress uniforms. When she stepped outside, escorted by the agent, a tall man in an army dress uniform detached from the group and walked toward her. As he got closer, Melissa's breath caught. Despite the formal uniform and the cap that partially shadowed his face, she recognized the burn scars on the right side of his face. The man from the flight, the stranger she'd given her seat to. But instead of the civilian clothes he'd worn on the plane, he now wore a highly decorated military uniform with gleaming medals across his chest. The insignia indicated he was a high-ranking officer. "Miss Collins," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Colonel Thomas Garrett, United States Army Special Forces. We met on a flight to Sydney a few weeks ago, though I didn't properly introduce myself then." Melissa shook his hand, struggling to process what was happening. "You're military?" She mentally kicked herself. Of course he was military. The uniform, the helicopter, the security detail. It was all so obvious now. But on the plane, he'd just seemed like a regular person with severe burns, not someone important enough to command a presidential helicopter. "Yes, ma'am," he confirmed. "I was traveling to Australia for specialized burn treatment. They're doing groundbreaking research there that isn't available anywhere else yet." Melissa's eyes widened as the pieces started coming together. "So, you're not just military. You're someone important in the military." A flicker of discomfort crossed Colonel Garrett's face. "I lead a special forces unit. 3 years ago, our team was deployed on a classified operation when things went sideways. Enemy forces had us surrounded, and my men were trapped in a burning building. I managed to get everyone out alive, but—" He gestured to his scarred face, the gesture somehow both casual and profound. "I paid a price. Worth it, though. Every one of my men made it home to their families." He gestured to the helicopter. "I hope you'll forgive the dramatic entrance, but I wanted to thank you personally for what you did. Your kindness that day meant more than you could possibly know." Melissa shook her head in disbelief. "But isn't that Marine One? Is for the president?" "Usually, yes," Colonel Garrett nodded. "But sometimes exceptions can be made. The president was quite moved by your story." "My story?" 3 days after returning from Australia, I received the Medal of Honor at the White House, he explained. During my acceptance speech, I told everyone about the kind woman who gave up her first-class seat to a stranger with burns, never expecting anything in return. The First Lady was in the audience. Melissa's mouth fell open. "The Medal of Honor? That's the highest military decoration." "Yes," Colonel Garrett finished for her. "I received it for an operation in which my team was ambushed. I managed to get everyone out, but not before." He gestured to his scarred face. "The burns were severe," he continued. "For months, people couldn't look at me without flinching. By the time I boarded that flight to Sydney, I'd gotten used to being treated like I was contagious. Then you came along and showed me a simple kindness that reminded me I was still a person worth seeing." He turned toward the helicopter. "The specialized treatment in Australia was successful, more than we'd hoped. But what really healed something in me was your act of compassion." A woman in uniform approached, saluting Colonel Garrett before addressing Melissa. "Miss Collins, if you'd be willing, we have something we'd like to show you." "Show me?" Melissa repeated, feeling like she was 2 steps behind in every part of this conversation. "We've arranged something to thank you," Colonel Garrett explained, "but it requires a short flight." Melissa looked at the helicopter, then back at the colonel. "On that?" He smiled, a genuine smile despite the scarring. "Consider it the first part of your thank you gift." Minutes later, still trying to process everything that was happening, Melissa found herself boarding Marine One. The interior was nothing like the commercial planes she booked for clients. Leather seats, polished wood, and military personnel who treated her with deferential respect she'd never experienced before. "Where are we going?" she asked as the helicopter lifted off, giving her a bird's-eye view of her neighborhood. "Andrews Air Force Base," Colonel Garrett replied. "Just the first stop." At Andrews, Melissa was escorted to a gleaming C-37A, the military version of a Gulfstream 5 jet. Inside, it was appointed more luxuriously than any first-class cabin she'd ever seen in brochures. "This is incredible," she breathed, running her hand along the polished table. "But I still don't understand why." "When I told your story at the White House," Colonel Garrett explained, "something extraordinary happened. Every military person in that room recognized what you did. Not the seat itself, but seeing a wounded warrior as a person, not a victim." He settled into the seat across from her as the jet prepared for takeoff. "The First Lady suggested we do something special for you. When she learned you were a travel agent who'd never experienced the luxury you help others enjoy, she had the perfect idea." The jet taxied down the runway and took off, climbing smoothly into the morning sky. "We're taking you to Hawaii," Colonel Garrett continued, "to the military resort at Hale Koa on Waikiki Beach. It's normally reserved for military personnel and their families. You'll stay in the suite usually kept for visiting dignitaries. Everything has been arranged. Helicopter tours of military installations normally closed to civilians, a private cruise of Pearl Harbor, exclusive access to beaches on military property." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "All this because I gave up a seat?" "No," Colonel Garrett said firmly. "All this because when everyone else saw my scars, You saw me as a person who deserved dignity. That's worth more than you know. The next 7 days were beyond anything Melissa could have imagined. She experienced Hawaii from perspectives no tourist could access. Military helicopters showing her hidden waterfalls, naval vessels taking her to restricted islands, 5-star accommodations at a fraction of what civilian hotels would charge. On her second day, an AV captain gave her a private tour of Pearl Harbor aboard a military vessel. Usually only diplomats and visiting dignitaries get this view, he explained as they approached the USS Arizona Memorial from an angle no tourist boat would ever take. Why is everyone being so nice to me? Melissa asked. I just gave up a seat on a plane. The captain looked at her thoughtfully. Colonel Garrett is a legend in the special operations community. When he got hurt, something changed in him. The man who never backed down from anything started avoiding public appearances. Then you came along and treated him like a person, not a victim. That matters to all of us. Later that week, Melissa experienced her first helicopter tour, flying with military pilots over restricted training areas and pristine beaches closed to the public. The pilot handed her a headset as they flew over a hidden waterfall. Colonel Garrett said you'd appreciate this next spot, the pilot's voice came through the headset. It's his favorite place on the island, not even on tourist maps. As they rounded a mountain ridge, Melissa gasped. A cascading waterfall dropped into a perfectly clear lagoon surrounded by lush green vegetation. No roads led to it, no trails marked the way. It's beautiful, she breathed. Colonel says this is what heaven must look like, the pilot replied. He came here after his final surgery, before going back to active duty. Said it reminded him what he was fighting for. But the most meaningful moment came on her final evening, during a private sunset dinner on a military beach. Colonel Garrett joined her, now dressed casually in a polo shirt and slacks. I've been wanting to tell you something, he said as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon. The treatment I received in Australia has been more successful than we anticipated. Next month, I'm heading back for the final procedures. That's wonderful, Melissa said sincerely. He nodded, looking out at the ocean. Last time, I was dreading the flight. This time, I've booked 2 first-class tickets. He turned to meet her eyes. The second one is for you, if you'd accept it. My doctors think it would be beneficial to have someone I trust accompany me. Me? Melissa asked, stunned. But I'm not family or military or... You're the person who showed me kindness when I needed it most, he said simply. And sometimes that's more important than any other connection. Melissa looked out at the Hawaiian sunset, thinking about how a single moment of compassion had led to all of this. Not because she'd expected anything in return, but because it had been the right thing to do. I'd be honored, she said finally. On the military flight back to her home, Melissa thought about all the clients she'd helped plan dream vacations, how she'd lived vicariously through their experiences. Now she had stories of her own to tell, ones that no amount of money could buy. When the plane landed and she was escorted back to her modest house, there was a package waiting on her doorstep. Inside was a small model of Marine One and a handwritten note from Colonel Garrett. Some people spent their lives collecting luxury experiences. Others, like you, collect moments of kindness. Thank you for reminding me which one matters more. Melissa placed the model helicopter on her desk at Sunshine Travel, next to the postcards from places she'd never been. And whenever people asked about it, she would tell them about a burned stranger on a plane who taught her the most important lesson she'd ever learned. Kindness doesn't cost anything, but its value is immeasurable.